It's really a pleasure for us to be here. This is actually my third trip to Budapest. Steve actually is more connected to Hungary because his family actually and his mother was born down in Hahot, down around Lake Balaton. So his actual last name is?
Blash.
Blash.
But Americanized to Blash.
So it got changed over time. So we're going to talk about this dual role because both of us have played both roles over the years. It's kind of interesting because when we talk about adaptability and things that have had to change as we go through this, this is one of those areas where actually if we look at it, the business analyst, both of us started out there. Actually, we both started out as programmers and then systems analyst. I went the data route, more of a data analyst.
I went the process route.
And he went the process route. And we worked with a lot of analysis back then. Both moved into project management, and then the BA role disappeared. And one of the things that we see is that some of the results of that. Okay? The fact that we don't have good requirements, the things that we go through. Now with Agile, it's a little different because you do have a continually changing type of requirements and you continually look at them. But then you start looking at, well, what's the role of a business analyst on an Agile project? Because part of that comes down to the point that you have a product owner. And that product owner is the one that helps determine the requirements. But half the time, they're not skilled in that particular ability to provide enough detail to make sure that we deliver what we want, which comes back to all these percentages where we just weren't able to do it. I can remember when the 4th edition of the PMBOK guide came out, and they added a new process called collect requirements. And I was working with engineers who they're managing multi-million, billion-dollar projects. And they came to me and said, what's a requirement? In engineering, they didn't get requirements. They didn't have to collect them. They already had them. They just had to manage the execution of those requirements. It was because they were bringing the IT folks in. And as an IT person, we have to figure out what it's all about. We don't get an architect or a systems engineer to give us all this stuff. We have to do it ourselves. So this whole business analysis kind of came back in, and then it went away. Because unfortunately, we got into analysis paralysis. We analyze things till whatever, go down a rabbit hole, whatever you want to say. And so they got rid of us. We don't need business analysts or systems analysts, as they were called, because you're delaying the project. The fact that they didn't know what they were doing, not that important.
Yeah, our background pretty much is software development and IT infrastructure, and we've been contract project managers to many corporations, from 6-month projects to multi-year, multi-million-dollar projects. And we're always looking at the concerns of the stakeholders, trying to figure out what do they want. And I really like it when they say, we're not sure what we want. Can you figure that out together? I don't like to hear, we know exactly what we need, and we're going to tell you. Those are the projects that I think are kind of boring. And so we're looking at the various constraints and the assumptions we have in projects, working with the stakeholders, working with the sponsors of the project. What's the vision? What's the vision for this particular project? Why are we doing it? Is it going to produce more revenue for the organization, or is it going to reduce cost? You know, what type of approach am I going to use as a project manager on this particular project? I came up through predictive types projects, you know, the waterfall projects. Then I moved into agile projects a long time ago. When people say Agile's new, I'm going like, yeah, it's been around for like 30 years, guys. Don't you know that? And I've used extreme programming. Anybody here ever do extreme programming? One person. Yeah, that was really popular in the 90s, you know. But we were talking about how do we develop things in short periods of time, how we can deliver value to the organization as quickly as possible. And along came a lot of other different types of Agile techniques, and Scrum being probably the most important. The hands of the people using Scrum, well, that's pretty good, and the Scrum Master. And so we're looking at how do we apply the resources, how do we apply the processes to our project, how we have good communications with the business people, with the people on the project, when it requires a certain set of what we call power skills today.
Yep. So then let's look at, well, what's business analysis then? What's a business analyst? And actually, I prefer to use the term business analysis rather than the role of a business analyst, because it doesn't matter who does this, but somebody has to. Somebody has to figure out why we're doing the project. What is the problem? What's the current situation? What do we need to do to provide that result? We look at different solutions. Some are viable, some are not. We use the word elicit. Excuse me. We don't collect requirements, because that idea of collecting means that you can find it, and it's not there. These are ideas, these are changes, the adaptability that we're going into. We've got to elicit that out, documenting it to whatever degree makes sense. Scrum, barely sufficient documentation. Not no, but barely sufficient. Who is that documentation for? How long does it last? What kind of updates do we have to make to it to keep it current? But we have to not just work on capturing the results and the requirements, but we have to manage and make sure that when the team provides that solution, we can actually implement it. We come usually from more of a business background or a business mindset, understanding that business acumen. We work with the project team to convey what those requirements are. And then we work with the team to make sure they understand those requirements, and especially we get into testing. A lot of the stuff that the business analyst does provides the test cases, the scenarios that are needed to test to make sure that we've delivered the right thing. And then at the end, we make sure that it sticks. One of the things that I always kiddingly get talked about is I make the comment that in business analysis, we go from the as is to the to be and make sure we don't go back to the as was. And that's the role of the business analyst after the project is finished. Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
That's right.
So, in effect, the whole business analysis role starts way before the project. This is where we are working with the actual people in the organization who've identified either a need, which could be a problem that needs to be solved, it could be an opportunity, or it could be that good old compliance requirement that we have to do. We take that and we look at the situation in which this is happening and come up with some alternative solutions. Once we get into that, then we work with the business to create a business case. Now, if you remember as a project manager, one of your inputs to start a project is a business case. How many of you actually receive a business case to start your project? Yeah, only a handful. Because the business case is what will explain to you why this project is being done. And how did they justify through some sort of portfolio management the actual investment in this particular project? That, along with this benefit management plan, which kind of cropped up in the 6th edition. Actually, if you go back to the first printing of the PMBOK 6th edition, you don't see the benefit management plan as an input into your project charter process. The second printing, it did, because that's dependent and mostly explained in the program standard. Because at a program level, you really have to understand what benefits this work is going to do, what it's going to provide, when it's going to provide it, all of those things, which are part of program management. But it's also critical to all those individual components that make up the project itself. So those things go into some sort of selection criteria. Maybe it's a portfolio management process. Maybe it's a squeaky wheel, which is what I've had a number of times, and I don't know if squeaky wheel translates. It's that end user that just keeps bugging us over and over. I want my project, I want my project, I want my project. And you finally do it, so he won't call anymore. But that's a case where we have to have a determination as to what we're going to work on. And that's the front end of it.
Yeah, this next slide here really talks about basic project management. You learn this when you're first learning about project management. We got to start the project, we have to plan out the project. What's our scope, what's our schedule, what's our cost? We develop some sort of solution, we verify and validate that solution, and then we implement that transactional application into the production environment. There's a lot of work that takes place there to prepare the organization as to how we're going to change things the way they're going to be done. We can do this on a large scale for a large project, predictive waterfall type project. For an agile project, we do the same thing. It's more of a spiral. We plan, we analyze, we develop, we implement. We plan, we analyze, we develop, we implement. We continuously do it over and over again. And the reason why we do that is we want immediate feedback from the stakeholders is this what you want? And they'll say, no, a lot of times, because we interpret it incorrectly. Because I, as a project manager, I don't know the business. I worked in chemical companies, insurance companies, robotic companies, Coca-Cola Corporation, McDonald's Corporation, a lot of these different industries. I'm not an expert in any of those type of things, but I am an expert in project management and the idea of planning out the process, all these type of things. I get the people involved in the project, and that's why the projects become very successful. Chartering a project, I learned this the hard way. I was informed we're going to start this project, so I called one of the key stakeholders and I say, hey, I'm ready to start working on your project. And he goes, what project? I don't know anything about a project. I jumped the gun is what I did. He hadn't been informed by his manager that we're going to start this new project. So the whole idea of chartering, which I think is really a great idea of you, is that here's the purpose of this project, these are the objectives, this is what we want to accomplish. But I need to do this in a more formal way, something that's written up. In fact, a lot of times I like to do a kickoff meeting with the chartering process that says, here's the sponsor, and they're up and talking to the people and saying, this is what the project is all about. This is why we're going to be doing it. And then they send out some letter or email out to everybody in the company that everybody's aware of this project that's underway and why we're doing it, especially that vision of, I'm pulling that from the executives. What's the vision they see? How we're going to accomplish the objectives and providing some sort of roadmap. The roadmap looks from an Agile perspective, which is where I use it the most, is I go up to a whiteboard and I draw a line. Usually on an Agile project, the target date is given to you, and the money is given to you. You got so much money and so much time to get this done. And I'm looking at what features can I develop within a couple of months, maybe 2 months, 3 months, and I'll work with the sponsors, the key stakeholders, to figure out the releases that I need to develop, and for them to get immediate feedback on that, and actually to make use of and put it in production. So all of these, it's simple. It's a simple process. It's a top-down type of process that I do for planning, and I do this really the same thing in a regular production type project that I work on. So this, to me, I think is a really effective tool, working with the executives to try and scope out the project.
So I have to admit, both of us have been project managers. We have a daughter who, for 2 years, has been in charge of the school parent-teacher group. Now, part of that was during COVID, where they weren't sure what they were going to do. And then towards the end, when things kind of opened up. Now, she's one of these that she knows project management, but she refuses to use any project management terminology. So she was really stressed out about all of these different events that had to be done for the school. And I kept saying to her, well, just, kind of lay it out. Put a long-range calendar out there, and when are you going to have your fall festival and your spring festival and back to school and things? It's a roadmap. But I couldn't use that term because that's an IT, that's a project management term.
That's what Mommy and Daddy do.
She came up with her own terminology. The thing also about this roadmap, I kept saying to her, what's down there a ways? Don't even think about it yet. Because, for instance, in our case, she had a Christmas event during COVID. Are we going to even get to have it? Are we going to have to be inside, outside, whatever? We're in San Diego, so we're spoiled that we can be outside all year round, and we do. We get some drizzle every once in a while. But I said, don't go down into detail on what that's going to be until you get closer to it. Never, ever would I even think of using the term progressive elaboration. She would have shot me. But I said, wait till you get closer and then make those decisions. But isn't that one of Lean's ideas? Decide as late as possible. It's not just project management. It's taking this roadmap and chunking it into pieces. A lot of times those dates are the constraints that have been given to us by the business and an idea of what we might do, but because of that business acumen and knowing who our competitors are, if they start to come up with something new, we may have to change the roadmap. And that's where the agility starts to come in. We have an idea of where we're going, but if we see something we really like or something that needs to be done, similar to when we drove down these last few days down to Lake Powhatan, we knew when we had to be back, but we didn't know what we were doing. So we felt like, here's the roadmap, and if we see something we like, we'll go explore. We know those final dates, and we figure out what's the most important as we go through there. Stakeholders are an interesting area, though. And this is where you probably have more discussion as to who's in charge of stakeholders. Is it the BA or is it the PM? So from a project management standpoint,
you're identifying who the various stakeholders are. You're talking to the sponsor quite often. They're nominating people that you're going to be working with, and you're basically, in fact, the very first project I did, I would send out an email to the people, telling me information about themselves. So I had all their personal information, I had all their contact information, and I had some of their work experience too. And I was getting that, and I was putting that in the stakeholder register. And the feedback I was getting from myself, from all these different people, I was learning more about the business while I'm doing this, and about the people and the personalities I had to work with this. And this helped me identify that stakeholder register.
So if you remember, they talk about two different parts of the stakeholder register. One is the part that has basically the basic contact information for all the stakeholders. What department they're in, maybe how to contact them, maybe their preferred method of communication, things like that. From that standpoint, that's the identification portion of a stakeholder register. From a BA, though, or somebody that's playing that role, they want to know more about this person. How do we react with them? How are they susceptible to what we're doing? We have this thing we talk about as far as sense-making activities, which is when we get into change management, where we take individuals and we kind of have like a focus group so that they can start to understand, why is this change happening? What is it going to do to my job? How is it going to affect me? That is the analysis portion that goes into the stakeholder register. And it's usually protected because there's some personal information that may go in there. Now, I actually was working with a group of consultants, many of which worked with the same stakeholders when they would go into a company. And there had been a couple of little comments about the one consultant, about how he was very different, how he worked with people differently. So I asked him, and I'm going to ask you the same thing. If you had a stakeholder register and it gave you information about this particular stakeholder, would you read it first and then go meet with the person? Or would you go meet with the person and then go read what somebody else had said? How many of you would read about that person first? Okay. Would it matter as to who wrote that? Because if he were to write something about a stakeholder, I probably would consider about 40% different. Because we have different personalities and we work with people differently. I personally want to go talk to the person, kind of form my opinion, and then yes, I will go kind of see what he's written about them. But I'll wait and make my own opinion, because I work differently with stakeholders than he does, and I think all of us do. We have those different ways, and sometimes it's a positive, we can work together, and in some cases, as we found out, he said we worked with Coca-Cola. 4 years we worked with them putting in a PMO and a methodology. He was there 1 week, I was there 1 week. We went back and forth because we were also working with McDonald's at the same time. People would come in and say, oh, wait, Greta, you mean Steve's not here this week? I'll come back next week. And the same thing would happen. But that was because there are connections that you make with people, and they're very different. So part of this, when we talk about what does the BA provide in that stakeholder register, it's a little bit more personal aspects, a little bit more understanding of where those individual stakeholders are coming from. What's their interest? Where are they concerned? Those kind of soft comments that are in there. And they usually are meant to be protected. That's your opinion. And sometimes we don't actually let the person see that because they may not agree with it, even though, it's once again how we see them and how we work with them.
Yeah, as a project manager, I'm always concerned about the stakeholders who are quiet. They don't speak a lot. Like, why are they not? And so I ask questions and trying to get them to respond to that. I'm also looking for the stakeholder who's against the project, They want the project to fail. And that's why they're not giving you information, or they perhaps give you false information. But when you ask for certain information and I'll get back to you, I'll get back to you, and they never get back to you, that's usually a sign they're not really on board with the particular project. But most of the time we're talking to the stakeholders, and most of them are very enthusiastic. They have vision, they have an idea what they want to accomplish. And together we'll figure that out by analyzing all those different requirements they have. It's not always straightforward.
So that cuts into the whole idea of the communications. And actually, when you start talking about a communication plan, actually now in the new PMP exam, there are 2 communication plans. There's one to the stakeholders as to how you're going to communicate with the stakeholders, what those different communications are. And you have a team communication plan as to how you're going to communicate within your own team. So obviously when we start talking about that, the BA is probably more concerned about the types and the content of the communication, even though the PM usually is the one that provides that. The team communication obviously comes from the project manager. So when we start talking about planning, now I'll have to tell you, we're from Southern California. We're about an hour away from Disneyland. We have 4 grandchildren who kind of live at Disneyland. We have annual passes, so they go all the time. The Cheshire Cat. I can't really play it because I don't have authorization to do it, but you can all think about it, where Alice goes up to the Cheshire Cat and asks, which road do I take? And the cat says, where do you want to go? Alice says, I don't know. So the Cheshire Cat says, then it really doesn't matter. And the problem is if we don't do planning, even on a very, very small scale, we don't know where we're going. Those of you that said you do Scrum, how many times do you plan? Every 2 weeks, right? Scrum and Agile plan at least 10 times more because they do it more often on smaller pieces than traditionally. Traditionally, we plan out maybe a whole phase. We kind of know what we're doing, how long it's going to take, and we can go from there.
The key planning task for the project manager is really concentrating on the project requirements. Not the product requirements, but really the project requirements. And a lot of times it's it's all the technical requirements that we have. We're going to create a project plan for identifying the scope, the schedule, and the cost of the particular project. There's a lot of subsidiary plans we talk about, the communication plan, the stakeholder management plan, the risk management plan, all these different components of the overall project management plan that we're trying to figure out the best approach to apply on our project, which could be traditional waterfall or Agile, Scrum, or hybrid. And I think I would like to see the hands of those people that consider this hybrid project management.
Kind of interesting. Yeah, there's some back there.
Yeah.
Good.
So more of a hybrid approach. So you're not pure Agile or Scrum, and you're not
Wonderful.
or a traditional way of doing the particular project.
So when we talk about actually those plans, there was another plan that cropped up in the PMBOK guide. There was a scope management plan, and there was a requirements management plan. Now, the question I always ask is, what comes first? Do I have requirements, and then I determine what's going to be inside my scope? Or do I know what my scope is, and then I determine what the requirements are? And this is kind of what the requirements management plan was talking about. Now, the business analysis plan, which you don't see in the PMBOK guide, that's more in the BA guide, which I'm sorry, but I can't really recommend the BA guide from PMI, even though I was one of the key people writing it. There is a practice guide called Business Analysis for Practitioners that I highly, highly recommend that you take a look at, because it talks about all these activities that we're doing. The business analysis plan basically says, I need to tell the project manager how I'm going to elicit these requirements. I'm going to have to tell the project manager to put in the schedule time to review these requirements. So my plan, as far as my business analysis plan, is really what are my activities that I need to do, and how do those slot in to the overall project plan itself. Now, there's also this idea of a fourth baseline. You have a scope baseline, you have a schedule baseline, you have a cost baseline. Once we've identified those requirements and we determine these are the specific requirements that we will deliver, that becomes your requirements baseline. And if you're using Scrum, that's your iteration baseline. Those are the actual stories, requirements that are going to go into that iteration. Once they go in, they've been baselined. There's no changes on them. Same thing. So the requirements baseline says, I have this big scope that says, maybe I'm going to automate the check-in into make a reservation for a hotel, for instance. Very, very high-level scope. What are all those little tiny requirements that it has to do? Does it have to check availability of rooms? Does it have to figure out how far away you are from where the hotel is? All of those are individual requirements, and we prioritize them, and then we put them into the baseline as to those are the ones we will deliver. So when we talk about requirements, it's not just one thing. There are tons of different types of requirements. They're gathered and understood at different times. Your business requirements tend to be the objectives from the organization. Why are we doing this? What do we think we're going to accomplish? The actual stakeholder requirements come specifically from different stakeholders, and most likely they're from external stakeholders. People who may be in a regulatory industry and you have to report back certain information. Those are stakeholder requirements. You have quality requirements that you have to work through. You have project requirements. What are those reports that have to be done? The milestones, all of those type of things that we have to do. The actual product, and I don't like that term, because many times we are not delivering products as the result of a project. We're delivering a solution. And what is the functionality? What will that solution do? Is it going to allow check-in to the hotel? Is it going to allow check-out? Is it going to allow you to post charges from the restaurant onto your hotel bill? What are those requirements? Those are the functional requirements. The non-functional are how it has to perform. And those usually come later unless they were part of some of those constraints that came in at the beginning of the project. 24/7 access. The fact that we have to have a 6-second response time. We need security, especially if we're going to make any charges or put a hold on a credit card. Those are non-functional requirements. Those are all different types of requirements that usually the project manager just kind of lumps them into one big set of requirements and doesn't focus on it like the BA does. So when we start talking about adaptive, okay, different language. 50% of the new PMP exam refers to agile terminology. We're learning a second language, and in many cases that language just is using a different word a backlog, which is very confusing to very many people. A backlog is just anything. It's that list of requirements that we haven't decided what we're going to do with it yet. As we get closer and we take that roadmap and we identify there's certain things that have to be delivered at a certain time, then we have a release backlog and we break it down. Now, I don't know about you, but whether you use Amazon or something like that, where you can put in a wish list. Could be anything that you might consider buying. That is your product backlog. Anything. Now, we have just changed our backlog and created another one called Christmas. So we've moved all these stories and all the things that the kids want for Christmas into another backlog for Christmas. But once again, doesn't mean that we're going to give the kids everything they want, thank goodness. But what we do then is periodically we'll pull things out of that backlog, put them into the shopping cart, and hit purchase. That's your iteration backlog. That's the best way to think about how these requirements continue to get down into more and more detail as we go through that.
So executing the project, these requirements we talked about, the user stories, you know, if something fits on an index card or stickies, we write it all out. And we're identifying where that goes. We identify releases in that roadmap. We identify the releases, and that becomes the user story for that particular release or that particular sprint or iteration. We're defining these things, identifying them, and we pull these things over. We break them down into what we call story points. So we don't like to track hours, but I know for those people who have to track hours, you probably will estimate in hours, but we find that people reporting the hours is not always very accurate. So we like to switch over and use what we call story points. And a story point is basically what the team comes together determines the value of one story point, or 2 story points, or 3 story points, or 5 or 8 or 13, whatever. And so the whole idea behind this is to get a sense of what we're trying to accomplish with these various user stories, breaking them down into various tasks.
So when he said that a user story usually is written on an index card, the front is what is it, and the back is the acceptance criteria. The BA looks inside between the front and the back. And they use that to elicit more information, understanding. They do some analysis, and as a BA, I learned that there's a number of different things. One is personas. A user story has a persona. When I have different personas, I probably have different rules. I have different information. I might even have a different process that I can use. If I've been a guest at that hotel, they already know a lot about me. It's a very different process from somebody who's never been there before. That's this process that goes on during executing from the BA's standpoint. Part of what happens, though, we always have more on that to-do list than we can do. And as a result, we always have to continually reprioritize. And when we say we accept change at any point in time, up until the point in time that the team says, this is what's going to be in this iteration, we can have all sorts of changes. The product owner, the BA work on reprioritizing, providing that information to the team, and once it's provided and they accept it for 2 to 3 weeks, that's what's going to be worked on. So this whole idea of the refinement is usually a BA with the product owner working together. Now, as we get into this, though, this is another thing. Showed up in the 5th edition. Just showed up. This new chart called a traceability matrix. No explanation. This is the BA's tool that once we put the requirements onto the baseline, we trace and make sure that each one of those requirements is actually delivered. Now, how many columns here? It's up to you. This could be a simple Scrum task board with to do, in progress, done. It could be a Kanban board with 5 or 6 columns, or it could be an Excel spreadsheet. Now, I like the Excel spreadsheet because a couple of these columns down here have to do with testing. And when you get into testing, what was the test case? What was the test result? I can hyperlink to those documents. So if anybody wants to go back and find it, they can do it, which is that part of that traceability.
The verification of the deliverables is, from a software standpoint, we have to test the programs. And there's a variety of unit testing, integration testing that we have to go through in order to figure out, is this what they want? Is it doing what it's supposed to do? What are the bugs or errors that are cropping up, and how do we eliminate those type of things? So we promote the programs and we demote the programs as we're running into all these various problems. We then turn around and work with the stakeholders or somebody from the business community that's going to validate that. And that's that person who actually is keying in the information on their terminal, their computer, or their iPhone application, putting in the data themselves, not us demonstrating it. That's more verification, not validating.
So from the PM standpoint, they're making sure that the tests pass. From the BA standpoint, we're helping create those test scenarios and making sure that the detail. So when we talk about user stories, there's another tool that I can't go into here. It's called a use case, which goes down into the detail, which is a perfect segue into doing the testing itself. So once the project is finished, what do? Well, PM usually says, yep, I got there, my schedule was there, my cost was there, my scope, I got the sign-offs, and I'm out of here onto a new project. Not the BA. The BA has to make sure that this can be moved over, and actually those benefits that we had expected actually happen. So when I go back and look at that benefit, until it is used, and in Discipline Agile we talk about a consumable product, something that is used. You don't get value from just developing it and throwing it out there. The value, the benefit comes when you actually use it. So here, when we start talking about this, we bring some unique skills, but they're very similar. And what we have to do is understand where we're alike, where we have those skills, how we can work together. And I've had many people talk about wearing 2 hats. Sometimes my hat is on one side as a PM, sometimes my hat is on the other side as a BA. But they have to collaborate together. And this is really one of the problems that we run into, where the roles become so distinct that that collaboration isn't there. PMs need to understand more about the BA, and the BAs need to understand more about the PMs. So with that, hopefully give you some insight to some of the things that we've actually kind of experienced over the years. I will make a real quick plug. If you're not that familiar with BA, especially if you're not used to the practice guide, I definitely go out to PMI.org and download the BA Business Analysis for Practitioner. If you have LinkedIn Learning, I actually have a course that I created for LinkedIn Learning called Business Analysis for Project Managers. And I think it's just been opened up for free because I have enough views out there to make it free now. If not, you can't get to it, send me an email. We'll be more than happy to provide it to you. Anyway, I thank you for your kind of putting up with kind of the 2 points of view here, which sometimes are distinct, sometimes they overlap a lot.
Greta, Stephen, I think it's a fascinating subject, and it was a fascinating your presentation. So I remember a sentence you started, and Stephen finished it. So it is how project managers and business analysts must work together. Now we have a few minutes for questions and answers, and before going to the screen, let me ask you a naive question. I think that you gave us a very good list of the jobs of business analysts, what they have to do. But where do they come from, and where is their organizational position? If there is a production company and it has an IT unit and they develop software for production, marketing, bookkeeping, everything, then the business analysts are a part of the IT department,
It depends on the organization, whether they're part of the IT but they represent the business, or whether they actually represent the business itself. The reason why they changed the name from systems analyst to business analyst was because as a systems analyst we were in IT and we provided the requirements for the project. The business analyst is meant to be more in the business environment, so they understand the problem or the situation, the project works on it, and then when it's finished, it gets transitioned back to the business, and the BA goes with that transition.
What does it mean in practice? So if the IT unit develops software for the marketing department, then it means that the business analyst must be a member of the marketing department, or it's a special talent pool somewhere in the company, the project office maybe?
Actually, I think it's more the skills, the competencies that a business analyst has. To being able to understand the terminology, understand the rules, pull out all those things, where even, because I've worked in all these different companies too, but because I can translate their terminology and I can understand and draw out those rules, I can represent them. So it isn't that I have to be part of that, but boy, do I find somebody in there that I can connect with.
It is representation and interpretation as well. So sometimes programmers simply do not understand the language of business, and business people do not understand the language of program development, and the business analyst's role is to translate the needs, the words, sometimes the words, the sentences.
And that's actually when our kids, our daughters were very young and they had to go to school and say, what does your mommy and daddy do? And we said, we translate. Because we translate from, say, financial people to the IT programmers, because we knew both languages, or we could learn both languages. But you learn as a BA, you have the tools and techniques to help you understand the business.
But maybe I will need some translation, because I'm reading the first question, and it says, in Scrum, a PO should rather be a PM or a BA. You need some translation for it, yeah? It's a product understandable, I suppose.
Product owner. Yeah? The product owner needs to represent the business. So what normally happens, though, is that in order to make sure that the product owner can provide all the detail that the project needs, that's where the role of the BA in Agile happens. The role of the BA happens in a sprint before, where they're drilling down into what are the rules, what's the information, what's everything, so that when the PO, the product owner, provides that story to the team, they have all the additional information that the team needs to do it correctly, as opposed to guessing it. Well, you didn't tell me the order in which to do things, so I make it up. So, but yeah, the product owner BA usually are on the front end.
One of the problems with the BA playing the role of the product owner, decision. Can the BA make a decision for the organization? A lot of times the business analyst cannot do that. In Scrum, the product owner makes all the decisions, and they don't have to go back and ask for permission. So that's the big difference we see between the BA and the PO.
Using the marketing case, going back to the marketing, the product owner is from marketing, and he's somewhere at the top, and he's represented by the business analyst, working together permanently,
Working
regularly
together.
with the project
Working
manager.
together, yeah.
The problem with being at the top means that they're not going to be there. Because one of the things that Scrum says, which is one of our biggest challenges, is that the product owner should be full-time. And the reason being is that if we on the team have a question, the product owner's right there to answer those questions. Well, if they're really in that position to be able to answer, they're not there all the time because they have their own job.
Mhm.
So part of that has to be, we have to understand what's going on and then also have them be able to make the decisions, the prioritization especially.
And Steve, there is a question for you.
Mhm.
I'm interested in your opinion about it, that what is the best way of communication between the project manager and the business analyst? You use some examples, so I think that a way of communication is through the documents you listed on your slides.
Yeah, we do quite a bit of communication through the documents that we're writing, but we quite often will facilitate the requirements with the business people, and that's probably the best communication vehicles because they can all hear each other speak of what they want and share their ideas and change their ideas.
Shall they sit in the same room?
In the same room, yeah.
Room.
Always in the same room, but if it's done virtually, you can do the same thing virtually, but
harder.
it's a little bit more difficult.
So actually, the communication goes to the developers also, not just between the BA and the PM and the stakeholders, whatever. And I've actually gotten to the point where I let my development team sit in the back of these rooms when we're facilitating the requirements, kind of don't say a word, just listen. And I will tell from your body language if we're getting into an area that, like, don't go there, that's too technical or we can't do it. But I want them to hear the passion. I want them to hear the concerns of the business people, so they keep that in mind as they're doing the development. So a lot of the communication is in person. My point is the best communication is face-to-face at a whiteboard, where I get the product owner or the business person and the developer, and we sketch what's going on, and we write little notes, and when we're finished, we take out the cell phone and take a picture. That's
And
the
there is an
documentation.
interesting question about the change management responsibility, that who's responsible for change, for successful change, or it's a joint responsibility, or they are responsible for different parts, different aspects of the project?
Well, if they're talking about change management of the project, it's the project manager's responsibility, because all those changes have to go through that. But if they're talking about change management for the business, that's the BA.
Yeah, but if I go back to in the project too, when we get a change request in, the person who really can do the impact assessment of that change is the BA, because they're going to have a better idea of what requirement that change is going to impact and how does it cascade. And that's one of the big reasons for that traceability matrix, is to show how the relationship between the different requirements, so that if a change comes in, he monitors the change request to make sure it's logged and people are making decisions. The BA, though, on the other hand, is the one that helps figure out.
And who's responsible
impact
for
it's
the
gonna
budget, for money? Because I suppose that the business analyst would like
The
to get
project
everything.
manager is responsible for the budget.
Yeah.
It's a project manager.
Yeah,
Yeah.
project manager. So they got to control the money is being spent. So not the BA.
And time is money. So it's not just a budget, it's a schedule. And that's why, as a BA, I have to let him know time's going on. But go back to your change request. How long is it going to take me to do that impact assessment? And what was I supposed to be doing at that time? So it's a combination of not just whether we should do the request, but what impact it's having on what we're doing.
Thank you very much. We do not have more time, but we will send you the other questions and we will ask you to answer them, and we will post them on the website of the conference. So, Greta, Steve, it was great to be with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For coming here
Thank you.
and sharing your ideas with us.